morning. Good morning.
E noi non ci sediamo a tavola, scusate, ci mettete qua. You can stay here. Would you rather sit around the table?
Sure, that's perfect.
Don't you mind?
No, no, no. I didn't want to break protocol.
Do
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
No,
They
okay.
have all of the gadgets.
So communication needs us. No? Io? In English?
The more you do, the less you get.
I just introduce it quickly. Buongiorno a tutti. I think we're all quite moved by this awesome presence of Leymah Gbowee with us today. As you know, she's a very busy person. The Nobel Prize comes with fame, but also with the fact that somehow you then belong to the world, and the world wants you. So we're part of that world who wants you, and the fact that you're here today is so meaningful to us, and we are very, very grateful. This doesn't mean to be formal. What we really wanted with this visit, which was a kind of surprise to Mrs. Gbowee, and she was generous enough to accept to come and talk to you, is, you know, that you let Mrs. Gbowee know what you do, what the center is about, and its long story, its long history. The center is actually 35 years old this year, and it is a pride for our university. They're doing wonderful things, a wonderful job, and they are always so alert to all the questions of right and crisis in the contemporary world. So we're very proud of the center and of your visit, and we thank you and welcome with a big applause. Okay.
Thank you, Annalisa. On behalf of the Human Rights Center of the University of Padua, I'm very honored to warmly welcome to the Nobel Peace Prize Madame Leymah Gbowee, a human rights defender, a transnational activist for peace and nonviolence. The prize and motivation, I quote, for their nonviolent struggle for the safety of women and for women's rights to full participation in peace-building work. End of the quote. And you are present here today at the Human Rights Center are, for all of us, a strong incitement to continue with more and more determination to the struggle for building a democratic and equitable international order. Our university was among the first in Europe to establish a dedicated center to do research and training in the field of human rights, and it has set up a complete three-cycle curriculum in human rights studies, from the bachelor to the doctorate. The bachelor course in political science, international relations, and human rights is complemented by a master's degree in human rights and multi-level governance. The master's degree attracts students from all parts of Italy and from a range of European and non-European states. Recently, also, a joint international Ph.D. program has been launched that next year will laureate the first group of Ph.D. in human rights, society, and multi-level governance. Moreover, almost 20 years ago, the Human Rights Center of the University of Padua, along with a few other European universities and the support of the European Commission, started the European Master Programme in Human Rights and Democratization, the cornerstone of the Venice-based Global Campus of Human Rights Masters, a major project of the European Union, now involving 40 universities in Europe and many other worldwide. From 1999, the Human Rights Center participates in the global UNESCO chair system, hosting a chair in human rights, democracy, and peace. Since the beginning, the Human Rights Center is engaged in the transnational peace movement. Its ideas are a reference point for political pacifism in Italy, which has been growing since the 1980s. International human rights law is the compass. The route to follow is that of an institutional and non-violent road to peace. The democratization of the United Nations and the recognition of the human right to peace are the objectives to be achieved through the People's United Nations, city diplomacy, education and training, the strength of values, ideas, and laws. The Human Rights Center was one of the founders of the Peace Roundtable and the promoter of the Perugia-Assisi Peace March and the national coordination body of local authorities for peace and human rights. The Human Rights Center vision is that of humanism, to be realized in the extended space of internationally recognized human rights, constantly striving to build an order of peace from city, from municipality to the United Nations, where life and peace, the rule of law and the welfare state are seen as the two sides of the same coin, interdependent and indivisible. The Human Rights Center and the UNESCO Chair in Human Rights have promoted and carried out, with the collaboration of the National Coordination of Local Authority for Peace and Human Rights and many civil society organizations, a large campaign in Italy to support the work of the United Nations Human Rights Council for the recognition of peace as a fundamental right. More than 300 city councils and 5 regional councils in Italy have adopted a petitionary motion to this regard. As you know, the UN General Assembly adopted the Declaration on the Right to Peace on 19 December 2016. The Human Rights Center is starting with a new challenging project founded by the Ministry for Foreign Affairs in the context of the implementation of the Italian National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, as provided for by the Security Council Resolution 1325. These activities will include training courses for professionals and awareness-raising events for civil society organizations. I conclude. I quote the founding father of the Human Rights Center, Professor Antonio Papisca, said, "The DNA of a just, peaceful, and democratic world order is made up of basic principles that include the universality of human rights, their interdependence and divisibility, the indissociability of women's human rights from internationally recognized human rights, the proscription of war, the prohibition of the use of force for the settlement of international conflict, the rule of law, democracy both as right and the natural method for implementing human rights, the universality of international criminal justice, the international personal responsibility for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide." End of the quote. The attitude of openness and pluralism characterizes also the statute of our university, whose motto is Universa Universis Patavina Libertas. Padova's freedom is freedom for all. Dear Ms. Gbowee, around this table there are PhD candidates of our international Joint Ph.D Programme in Human Rights Society and Multi-Level Governance, and professors of the Master Degree Program in Human Rights and Multi-Level Governance. If you agree, each of them present in a few minutes their research project on human rights. Together with Vice Rector Annalisa Obe, we thought that this would be the best way to welcome you. At the end of this round table, we will be honored to give you the floor. we would like to know your ideas on, on how to improve our research and training in the field of peace and human rights. Dear Ms. Gbowee, a heartfelt thanks to be here with us today. For us, it is truly a great honor. You made us a great gift. Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Claudia, then to Marco, and so.
So, again, welcome. We met already this morning. My name is Claudia Pividori. I'm a research fellow here at the Human Rights Center. And basically, I deal with international human rights law, international criminal law, and humanitarian law. And I'm currently working on violence against women as a human rights violation and on women, peace, and security. Thank you.
Good morning.
Guglielmi.
I'm Marco Guglielmi. I'm a PhD student at Human Rights Center. I'm a sociologist of religion and a human rights scholar. My research topic is religions and human rights, and I'm trying, together with other PhD students, to develop a sociological approach to deepen the relation between the religious tradition and the new religious movements with human rights. My research project focuses on Orthodox Christianity. This religion has a problematic relation with the liberal democracy, human rights, and religious pluralism. And in my project, I tend to study the Orthodox diasporas in Italy. And I want to analyze if in a new socio-cultural context, as the Italian one, the Orthodox community developed new attitudes and practices and maybe a doctrine regarding human rights issue and religious pluralism. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco.
Thank you very much for coming. It's a great pleasure meeting you. My name is Matteo Tracchi and I'm also a PhD candidate here at the Human Rights Center. And my research focuses on citizenship and human rights education. The idea of the research is to look at how international and regional standards have impacted on policy and practice at the national level, and really look at how this human rights education can impact on children's attitudes and beliefs. And my research focuses in particular at the case study of Italy, and probably with a comparative analysis between Italy and Croatia. And I will use both quantitative and qualitative methodologies in order to understand how are human rights conveyed through human rights education in Italian middle school. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Maria Clara.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here, and I would thank everyone to receive me. I'm a visiting student here. I'm from Brazil. And my name is Maria Clara Santos, and I'm here to try to create or establish some kind of comparison to a urban law in Brazil settled in the ways of the European Landscape Convention. European countries have this long tradition of protection of territory and cities, and it leads to this complex paradigm, the landscape, and in 2004, Europe has created this convention, setting goals and principles to help states on protecting people and their territory. Brazil has no such legal order or something like that, so I'm trying to understand if there's some kind of way to establish this comparison, and the research overarching goal is to propose the establishment of an urban law framework that could enable the development of the city and try to improve democratic action of the diverse population groups and try to create a more equal society. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I think it's a great honor for us all, an incredible opportunity to have you here. My name is Rossella. I'm also a PhD candidate at the University of Padua. You can hear me? And my research project, broadly speaking, regards the implementation of socioeconomic rights and macroeconomic public policy making. I was specifically focused on the right to health in the European Union and on a specific time frame, which is late 80s up to date. This because in this period we can observe progressive, gradual retrenchment of welfare states in Europe with a gradual reduction of public expenditure. This reduces the resources to implement the right to health. So my objective is to measure this impact through solid evidence and data. And the true challenge is to bridge the gap between human rights law and the fields of economics and politics in order to truly implement the ESCR. Thank you.
Thank you. Benedetta Bixio. It is not as a researcher, but is a pillar of our Human Rights Center, is the administrative responsible of our center.
Yes, I'm the administrative manager, PhD student. For all students and professors here at the Human Rights Center in both projects and all activities managed by the center.
Thank you, Benedetta. And Chiara? No, Rosemary? Rosemary, please, is master student in human rights.
Exactly. I'm also not a PhD student here, but I'm a master student in human rights and multi-level governance. And here at the Human Rights Center, myself and Camilla. Thank you. Myself and Camilla and our colleague doing national civil service. So the Human Rights Center has had volunteers every year since 2008, and we spend 1 year helping the management of the center. So we write news, we update the website, we help with the conferences. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Potremmo, Camillo, usare il...
Posso?
Hear me?
No, no, it's necessary. It's necessary.
Yeah.
No, it's necessary.
Without?
Stiamo registrando. Please.
Okay. First of all, thank you for coming this morning. My research topic for the PhD in human rights mainly focuses on restorative justice in the Western Balkans. And what it looks at in specific is the administration of truth and reconciliation commissions developed in post-war Croatia and Bosnia. I chose this topic because these commissions were largely unsuccessful in their ability to achieve social justice, and although this was the outcome of their administration, there's a minimal amount of literary and qualitative studies done on this research topic. So my study attempts to minimize this gap. It has a threefold approach, and what it does is looks at relevant theories discussing truth and reconciliation commissions, and it conducts ethnographic part of the study, which will look at expert focus groups and localized perceptions and attitudes regarding why truth and reconciliation commissions failed, what kind of regional initiatives are ongoing, and what the population of experts and local community members would like to see in order to deliver this form of social justice. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. And my name is Ino Kerer. I'm a PhD student, and my research topic is about the human rights of intersex people, meaning with these those who came to world with a variation of sex characteristics. And the intent of this research is to detect the grounds and effect of their lacking legal and social recognition of their sex identities. And in particular, on one hand, the intent is to analyze if within a human rights framework and especially a child's rights framework, the genital surgeries which the intersex newborns underwent normally are lawful, and if yes, who should decide, who should give the consent to such surgeries? And if maybe it's also possible to make any comparison to other harmful cultural practice, such as maybe female genital mutilation due to some characteristic of these surgeries. On the other hand, another topic of the research will be the investigation into the different models that has been adopted since now in order to protect non-conform identities, meaning with these people that didn't recognize themselves within a binary and fixed gender and sex system, and such as the elimination of sex and gender categories or the introduction of other categories, such as Australia has done with a third gender. So this is the topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Alberto Lanzavecchia.
Good afternoon, and one more time, welcome. I'm, I guess, the latest member acquired by the Human Rights Center. I'm coming from an economics and business background, and I'm involved in microfinance teaching at the master's degree, and I am in charge for the Microfinance in Action Winter School in Nepal. Is that microfinance, or generally speaking, human rights, has to be somehow lived with people, so to put hands on the problem by meeting people all around the world. So in Nepal is what I did, but I try to apply this idea even when I supervise master's thesis students. One has been in Uganda, and now in these days another master's degree student, she's in Nepal, and who knows where will be the next one. But basically the idea is that sometimes you have to speak with people, to meet people in order to get knowledge, to get experience on human rights. That's my approach. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Professor Roberto Di Vogli. I'm here as a deputy director of this center, just recently nominated. I'm a professor of psychology, but of a strange kind. We started to study the psychopathologies of power as one of the last strands of research. And but originally it comes from public health. My PhD program was at University of California, Los Angeles. Then I moved to UCL in London. I've been in Michigan, in developing countries, a bit all over the place. And one of the overarching themes in public health was socioeconomic inequalities in health, the large disparities between social groups and countries, and how global policies like neoliberalism are on the way for the creation of a more just society. So that's pretty much summarizing my interests.
Thank you, Roberto. Domenico.
Thanks for being here. I'm Domenico Castellani, PhD student. My focus, the focus of my research, is on biopolitics and human rights. In particular, my focus is on democracy and democratization processes in My case study is about Kenya, so in Africa in particular. Biopolitics is not so much a tool for explaining political events. It's rather the acknowledgement that the way in which power relates to objects has changed. So my thesis will be on the idea of subject, how the subject has changed. In a biopolitical frame, how the power can be differently analyzed and considered. Meaning that the modality the power approaches and control the political landscape has changed, and so which way different modalities of seeing subject and power can affect the democracy and democratization processes. As I mentioned at the beginning, the case study for democratization process is Kenya. I mean, the election held in Kenya in August. In October, I was there as an electoral observer, so I'm back since 10 days from Kenya, and then trying to reflect how the sentence of the Supreme Court and how the rerun of the election can be read under this different and biopolitical approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Domenico. And now we give the floor. Luca, sorry, Luca.
Good morning. I am Luca Gazzola. I work here at the Human Rights Center as a technician, developing a website and communication tools for communicate the human rights knowledge.
Worldwide. Thank you, Luca. And now we give the floor to Ms. Gbowee. Her speech.
Thank you so much, and I sincerely apologize for the quality of my voice. I refuse to take my flu shot, and I'm paying a price for it. I'm happy to be here. Like Annalisa indicated, there was some mix-up with my schedule, but we've managed to make this work, so we shouldn't make a big deal out of it. It's very interesting to be sitting in a Center for Human Rights, especially in a time in our world where a lot of places where you have issues going on, people would rather talk about civil rights instead of talking about human rights, because human rights has all of a sudden become a word that is only associated with failing democracy, and particularly in Africa. In other parts of the world, especially when citizens are deprived, people want to talk about civil rights and not that they have human rights situation in their country. When I say it's interesting, it's because you are situated in Europe at a time in the history of our world where every awkward thing is happening. Terrorism, migration crisis, refugee crisis, threat to democracy in some parts of the world. We saw Brexit, and today we're sitting on the brinks of, God forbid, a nuclear war, you know. And when I listen to everyone talk about the topics that they're researching, it's like this is a room full of global affairs and looking for solution to global problems from the whole role of religion, as we see it in the description and the definition of the current wave of terrorism that we're seeing in our world, to Christianity and how people tend to see it. I'm a Christian as a religion of peace, but more and more subtly, those who are powerful and who profess Christ, what role they're playing in some of the biggest crises we're seeing happening in the world today, moving on to the whole issue of women, peace, and security. Coincidentally, we just launched a new center at the Earth Institute in New York at Columbia University, where I'm heading. It's called the Women, Peace, and Security. It's the WPS program within the Earth Institute. One of the things that we hope to do with that program is to reimagine peace and security, not just from a military perspective, but from a human security perspective. Because we've maintained, and I've maintained, that there's no way we can constantly think about wars as being just about guns and bombs and artilleries, when the things that leads to war is primarily religious issues, is primarily issues of identity and people's inability to choose for themselves. It's primarily citizenship issue. It's primarily wealth issue. It's democracy issue. I was in Kenya after the first round of elections and spent a huge bunch of my time in Kibera, where a lot of the politicians will use poor people when they're not happy about the results to cause chaos. And we spend that time in Kibera just using simple things, talking to people and saying to them, if you think you're poor now and people will exploit you to start a war, think twice, because 2 years into the war, you'll be poorer, you know. So, but the question about democracy and human security need, why is it easy to go into a slum community and mobilize young people in those communities to fight? Is because these young people do not have their basic needs met. They see their mothers and fathers struggle to put food on the table and do so. We're looking at that program from the perspective of human security. But beyond that, as you look at WPS, Women, Peace and Security issues, from just talking about your focus, we realize also that with all of the crises we're seeing in the world, women make up almost 50.1% of our global population. Where are they? You know, they're often left out. They have many documentations for women's involvement. We don't see it. The way I describe it is trying to see the world with one eye cover when you're leaving women out of the perspective of things that matters into the community. So it's really, really heartwarming to be here and to hear about it. It makes me feel like I'm home, because some of the issues that you're dealing with are issues that we have to deal with on a daily basis when we talk about different things. You talk about TRC, the person who's doing the research on Truth Commission. It's really very interesting because it comes back to the world order and how people want to make change and create change, but change is seen as a customized thing that should fit certain societies, whilst other societies will not, you know, fit into that. And that's where we have the whole human rights and civil rights issue clashing with each other, because when you talk about Bosnia and Croatia, all of these different places in Liberia and South Africa, when there are issues of war and trauma, the customized fate is, let's have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Even if the citizens have not agreed to do that, and then you put together a quasi group of people, they come up with findings that someone in the village where the mobilization take place, again, back to the Kiberas and the slum communities where people are mobilized, where they will never have the opportunity to read those documents and use, and that's where 80% of the population is concentrated, and you're saying this particular document is supposed to lead this nation into democracy. You know, it's hypocritical. Let's call it for what it is. So it's very interesting to see you saying, I want to look at why it failed and why it doesn't fail. If I have to use my sarcastic Liberian voice, I would say to you it failed because the people did not buy into it. Like most of the processes, people do not buy into that top-down approach to democracy like it's done for poor places, you know. I was talking to a group of young people and say, it's so unfair that today in the world we still have countries like America and other places writing human rights report for the Rohingyas and all of the different places, but when gun violence is at a very, very, and they still see gun violence, police brutality, and all of these different things as a civil rights concern. It's madness. So to bring it back home to this room, I'm very happy that we have a place that is working, and 35 years of doing this work, it's like 35 years of preparing some of the best people in the world to go out there to do what everyone. But I think my message is that we've all worked in silos for too long. It's time to see how we bridge our research and our work, bring them together so that it is a, how do you put it? It's not just a collaborative, but it's strategic in helping to shape where we want to take the world. For example, I do activism and go to different parts of the world. I have no clue, except for all of the tweets from President Trump and Kim Jong-un that I see and read on the internet. But what are the implications of a nuclear war on Africa? What are the implications of a nuclear war on Europe? I think it's time for these kinds of writings to start crossing, in different communities so that we all find a way of raising our voices. Those of us who are loud can go into the UN and say, stop sitting here and getting fat and start talking about the things that are threatening the world. But until we have a cross-team approach to peace building and research and all of the things that we're doing here, we'll continue to do this individualistic kind of work. I would like to see in your research around religion and peace and all of the different things, how these religions also look at the role of women and look at the role of women as it relates to peace. I would like to look at the whole concept of FGM, because in most parts of the world, people talk about female genital mutilation. How does that relate to sex change and all of the different things? Because again, it's the kind of double standards that we're talking about. How do people do FGM in one culture and it's evil, and then in another culture, people are allowed to change their gender and it's their civil rights? So these are the kinds of complicated challenges that makes me a very controversial person. And I apologize for bringing my controversy to this, but I'll open the floor up for people to ask me questions. If you have questions, and kindly help me with the time. I know we don't have a lot of time.
10 minutes?
Sure. What
okay?
time is it? It's 2 now?
It's 2.
Yeah, so 10, 15 minutes, and then I can just go and
prepare for next session.
Thank you.
Yes.
You mentioned that people are working in silos, and there are lots of good projects around the world on human rights, public health, for example. How would you envision a global movement on human rights? And how can activism becomes part of the basic curricula of universities that want to promote health and human rights and social justice in the world?
Well, I mean, knowledge is power. We all know that, and that's the reason why we spend our time listening to each other and learning from one another. I would say that we do need to create a new network, global network. I think where we failed, and correct me if I'm wrong, is in breaking down. What you're doing here is fantastic. What people are doing other places is very good. How is that being translated into something that women at the grassroots, young people at the grassroots can understand? I gave an example of the threat to nuclear war. Who from the sciences is informing us on how it's going to impact us economically, how it's going to impact us socially, how is it going to impact whatever we're doing? Is because from the way it is now is that it's just bickering between America and North Korea, and people in Asia will feel it. So you don't see activists in Africa getting involved in this conversation because there is no understanding of how this is going to impact us. As a matter of fact, if you look at this whole threat, there's a huge silence from within the corridors of the UN to the EU. When it heightens, everyone gets up. And then it goes down, everyone. So what is happening? you talk about how do we teach activism. Until we begin to imagine activists as, I'm looking for the right word, as people who are credible to the academic space, it makes it difficult, because I've spent my time in different universities around the world, and most times I get this thing of, you know, you're here, but we just don't know what to do with you.
Amazing.
Yes, we don't know how to maximize your time, because the veil that is in the eyes of academia is that she's just an activist. What can she contribute to this discourse? And if we must put truth to it, you all are aspiring doctors, and those of you who will end up in universities will eventually in 5 years forget that you had the activist fire in you, and you will start looking into books, and your whole life will become about research and the quality of your research. But how do you translate all of this material into the change at the community level? And that's where activism comes in. And I think we all have something to learn from one another. You can tell me how your research on women, or your research on religion, or your research on urban communities, how I can use it at the grassroots. And I can tell you how you can simplify, not take away the quality of your writing for another audience other than the academic space. Those are the kinds of things. But I think until we continue to work like this, because if you look at people in the activist community, we are not friends of people in the academic community, because we are noisy, we're loud, and we don't come with facts and different things. But we also make change, you know? And so I think if we had that kind of thing, so if you ask me, how do you teach activism? I will tell you, how do you take your writing and break it down into everyday things, and put fire in your students about it? Because everything you're writing about, everything everyone is writing about in this room is what activists are talking about outside. Religion, women, FGM, Kenya's elections, the Supreme Court ruling. If you go into Kenya today, everyone is doing trans people, LGBT rights, FGM. Nothing that you all have said around this table is not happening at the level, at the community level. So how do you now bridge that gap? Because when you sit and start to talk about some of the things, at some point I stopped writing, and I only took out the ones that my activist brain could comprehend. Let me go back. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm just trying to say, so when you talk about Christianity and Orthodox diaspora and citizenship and human rights education, international standard, impact locally, Italy, and the comparative, this, that, and the other, by the time you go too deep in there, you've already lost some of the people. My point is, how do you make one page of your 300 pages and sit down with an activist and say, this is what I'm talking about? And that activist will say to you, well, this is what I've been fighting for. You know, so how do we demystify some of the mysterious languages that you put into your thesis and into some of your research? When I went to grad school, I went to grad school to fulfill something that I felt I needed to fulfill. I had done activism, and there was this persistent question on my mind: does this really fit into the academic space? What we did in Liberia, is there a theory for it? Is there a strategy? Is there an academic name? And 1 year into my program, when we're doing strategic peace building or some other thing, I'll be like, but that's what we did, except that I did not know the name. So how do we bridge that? And I think we can do that by more cross-engaging. That's the kind of approach that I think we should take. Maybe 2 or 3 more, and then we'll stop.
I think you gave us the greatest gift already. really this is the issue. I think that we need to confront why doing research and what it means and how it feeds back into society and produces change.
Questions from the students?
You mentioned your experience in Kibera in August. So I'm given that I was not in Kibera, I was in another county. I was in Meru, but I'm curious to know, to hear a few words from you about your experience. What did you find in the field? What was the feeling of people?
Well, Kenya, like most democracies, and I would not limit it to Kenya or to Africa. Even here, I was in Austria recently, and when they were going to elections, and the rhetoric is the same everywhere. It's the politics, unfortunately, of our world has denigrated to the place where it's rhetorics of division, you know, either liberal Christian Democrat or conservative Christian Democrat. And what we're seeing, regardless of where we find ourselves, is tribalism, ethnicity. Because even here, when you have an election that is based around, and people are grouping on liberal this, conservative this, they've created their own tribes. So Kenya is at that place where you have the Kikuyus and the Luos always at one another's throat. When they had the failed elections in 2007, it was Kibera that was on fire because you have over 90,000 people living in a confined space with absolutely nothing. You walk through, have you walked through Kibera slum?
No.
I hope you go back and do that. Poverty stares you in the face. So when the elections started getting at that place, some activists in Kenya called and asked me, can you come? We know that you're very good at the community level. Can you come and help us to talk to mothers and young people, not to allow the politicians to use them? And that was the reason why I was there. And I made it very clear that I was there on a journey to accompany the activists from Kenya and not to impose my, perception or my beliefs. And we spent days, the first day we spent meeting with mothers who had refused to go to vote. On elections day, these were people who were saying, they were sitting at home and saying, we're not going to vote. And their husbands came and said, and the men in the community came and convinced them to go to vote. And once they voted, and there were all these accusations of irregularities, these same women got up, some of them, and took cutlasses and machetes and gave it to the men and said, we voted, they cheated us, now go and fight. So we are not always peaceful. So then that first day when I was there, it was to meet with these women. And basically in a community trying to illustrate some basic things of how war impacts us. We had a very honest conversation, and then we met with community leaders. So it was 4 days of just engaging within Kibera. And the last day, I met with about 80 pastors, grassroots pastors, who all had taken a position. And they were ready to use their phrase of the Bible. And what made working in Kibera very difficult from an activist perspective, the word peace had taken a side because they said the president used peace. May peace prevail. And for them, peace meant cheating. For the opposition, they used justice. So you see how complicated it became in that space, because if peace is about rigging and justice is about picking up arms and fighting, how do you find the middle ground? Which language do you use? So it was just now about using simple things of your child being sick. I had to bring it home for them, for some of the leaders to tell them that you're fighting for one politician or the other. If your child got sick, where would you go? Oh, we'll go to the government hospital. If the president's son got sick, where would they go? Or they'll fly him to the UK or the US. If the opposition leader's son got sick, they'll fly him to the UK or the US. So why do you want to destroy your future? And those are some of the practical things, because what I've found in my work is that most people, even at the community level, do not want to speak the truth to people. We try to be political about things that will explode in our faces. And I try my best not to be political about those things. So my time there was that, meeting with some people from the diplomatic corps also, and just sharing my thoughts on what I felt. It was a nail-biting time because the Supreme Court was going to rule. And once they ruled about a rerun, we're all very happy because there were many, many conversations about irregularity. Where the democracy is going, no one can tell, but we're hopeful because, again, grassroots activism has succeeded in keeping people a little bit peaceful. Because even though they've been having riots here and there, we haven't seen anything as bad as 2007. So there is hope for Kenya. One more and then we can. Yes, sir.
Can you describe us the current political situation in Liberia and give us some news about the last election? Much complicated.
No, it's okay. Liberia we're close to Kenya, but not so close. We went to elections, and the former soccer star, who's now a member of parliament, and our vice president were headed for runoff. And some people, another political party, sued. They went to court for a stay order on the runoff because of irregularities also. So the case went to Supreme Court, the stay order, the case for a stay order, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the opposition that filed their complaint that we should not go to runoff because the runoff should have been November 7th. So they put a stay on the runoff and asked the Election Commission to adjudicate all of the cases, all of the complaints before they can call a new runoff. Certain things are happening right now. The Constitution provides for the Election Commission to take between 30 to 90 days to do their investigation. If the Election Commission takes 90 days, our president mandates end January 16. It means she will have to leave, and the Speaker of Parliament will take over and oversee the elections and hand over power to whoever wins. The leaders from the Economic Community of West African States, the president of Togo, the president of Guinea, who is the president of the African Union, came to Liberia, and according to them, the legal process should take its course. That's one group. 2 days ago, the EU put a statement out that there is a need for them to speed up and have a runoff. Yesterday, the US government put up a statement that the first process was credible. So there is no need for a court case, and that the Elections Commission should hurry up and do a runoff. The Supreme Court is saying that they cannot dictate to the Elections Commission on when or how they should proceed because it's an independent body. If the Election Commission rule, we suspect that the complainants will take the case to the Supreme Court and it could delay. So that is where we find ourselves. And if it delays until December, January, the legacy of our president will probably be threatened, because in 70 years, there has not been a president in Liberia that has peacefully handed power over. So this is one legacy moment that she's probably going to miss if all of this. But through it all, I must really say, this is one time in my life, not one time, but I am extremely proud to be a Liberian, because not a single riot has taken place. Everyone has conducted themselves peacefully. But also it stems from the work that a lot of civil society organizations, including the organizations that I work with, have done at the community level. At the level of my foundation, we had a campaign called Sustain the Peace. And we went from community to community engaging with young people, because we recognize that young people between the ages of 15 and 25 have no recollection of the war. So we had to go back, showing them the film, Pray the Devil Back to Hell, spending time in the community, engaging them. We know that there will definitely be a runoff, maybe in December, maybe in January, but we're definitely going to have a runoff. But right now, this is where we are. There have been reports on the internet and other places that will go for an interim government. Our constitution doesn't make any provisions for that. So it's going to be a speaker who will take over, because they've done the parliamentary elections. So by January, they would do their first sitting and they will elect a speaker. And then our president, unfortunately, if this is not resolved, will have to hand over to the speaker, because her tenure will be over and there's no room for extending her tenure. So that's where we are. But I want to say a big thank you to all of you. Please, 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 I would love to see some of the research from the Human Rights Center here translated into children's book on some of the very difficult issues that you are writing about. Because I know that if we begin to teach young people early about women's rights, early about the role religion can play in bringing peace, early about some of the, let me go back, I'm trying to be nice, citizen and human rights education issue. I'm trying, if we're able to do, you know, territory issues and socioeconomic issues and the right to health issues and restorative justice and TRC, but just localizing some of the very important work that you do, you recognize that in the next 35 years, this will not just be a space where people will do research on these things, but be a space where you've now started celebrating the next generation of activists in Italy and other parts of the world. Thank you for having me, Annalisa, Professor Marco.
Dear Ms. Gbowee, thanks a lot for this fertile meeting, and I assure you your words will guide our future action. And thanks, of course, to Annalisa, Gbowee, and thanks also.
Vi aspettiamo in aula magna?
See, now we have a photo. 1 minute. There. And then we reach the aula magna at Palazzo del Po.